Welcome to the All Out Leadership Podcast, hosted by Pastor Eric Lawson, where each episode is uniquely designed to help you live all out by bringing you practical leadership from a biblical perspective delivered in 10 minutes or less. So whether you're a business leader, serving in ministry, or simply looking to grow in your leadership, this podcast is for you. Before we dive into this week's topic, make sure to subscribe to the podcast and download the show notes at ericlawson.com/podcast. And while you're at it, feel free to share the content on social media. Now, let's join Pastor Eric for this week's conversation.
Happy New Year and welcome to another edition of the All Out Leadership Podcast. So glad you're joining us. Because you're listening to this, it's safe to assume you are a leader. And because you're a leader, you do what every leader does this time of year. You reflect, you think on the good, the bad, and the ugly of last year, and you go, hey, this is great, going to keep doing this. That was not so great, probably want to change that. And so as you're reflecting, you're probably feeling some regret. We all feel regret. If you don't have regret, you just simply have amnesia. Now, what we tend to do is we tend to set our New Year's goals, our New Year's resolutions around this time of year. And I am still a fan of goal setting. I have modified along the way different ways that we do that personally, how we do that for our church. But I'm still a fan with the overall principle of goal setting. I'm not going to get into the specifics of goal setting today, but I want to focus on some principles that will help you and what other methodology that you're using on the new you for the new year. We do know the number one resolution and goal that people set going into the new year is lose weight and get in shape. I like what Jay Leno, the comedian, said. He said, research has found that there are now more overweight people in America than average weight people. So overweight people are now average, which means you've met your New Year's resolution. I appreciate Jay for that encouragement. Way to go. Now, when we set New Year's resolutions, we know statistically 30% give up by February, 80% by June, and 92% by year end, meaning only 8% of the people achieve and reach the goals that they set for themselves. And I think sometimes one of the reasons we fail isn't just, that we set too big of a lofty goal, but often I think it's the type of goal and the motivation behind the goal that often causes us to lose sustained willpower to get there. Now, often many of the goals that we set for ourselves are centered around the concept of happiness. I want to reach, this certain weight because I will feel happy about myself. I want to get to a certain financial condition because I will feel happy about, such and such. And, I'm encouraged by this. God actually cares about your happiness. In fact, the very first sermon that Jesus preached, he began with the word happy, and it's known as the Beatitudes. And I think it's rightly called Beatitudes because it's about be and then attitudes that we should have. Beatitudes. And when we look at the Beatitudes, they're really opposite from any goals that we probably ever set for ourselves. Just want to highlight a couple. Matthew chapter 5, verse 3 through 10. Here's a few. Blessed or happy are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. In other words, hey, blessed when you feel overwhelmed. Well, Jesus, I'm never happy when I'm overwhelmed. I'm happy when I'm underwhelmed. I'm happy when everything is perfect and the sun is shining and it's going my way. But Jesus says there can be a happiness in spite of what's going on around you. Here's another one. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. In the midst of experiencing some type of loss, Jesus says you could still be happy. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Look, I'm happy when I'm full. I'm happy when I have to use another notch in my belt loop, Jesus says you can be happy in the midst of hungering and thirsting. In other words, I may not have gotten everything I want. There still may be some things I'm lacking, and Jesus says I could still have happiness. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. To give mercy meant something happened to me that wasn't fair. Life isn't always fair. There could be unfair circumstances, things I can't control. And in the midst of what was unfair, I can still have a happiness. Here's what Jesus is really telling us. Happiness is not based on what's happening in your life. Happiness is an inside job. We can be happy in spite of what we can't control inside of our life. Happiness is a be attitude that we choose, not a be happening that we can't control. So quickly, as we close, 3 truths about happiness. And as I share these, just rethink your goals, rethink what you've written, how you've articulated it. And you know what? Maybe the goal doesn't necessarily need to change, but maybe how you word it, how you wordsmith and tweak it might. And so just think through these filters, this matrix, so to speak. Happiness isn't a race for a place, but a rest in God's best. I'm going to say that again. Happiness isn't a race for a place, but a rest in God's best. If we're only happy when we arrive someplace, then we're usually miserable in the journey. What I have found is the journey is a whole lot longer than the destination we're at. Because once we get to the destination, I find that there's usually another destination after that I set out for. And so if you're only happy when you arrive, you're rarely happy. If we learn to be happy in the journey, resting in God's best, we can experience happiness the whole time. Romans 8:28, one of my favorite verses, and that is that God will take all things and use them together for our good. So here's a great encouraging thought. If it's not good, God's not done. If it's not good, God's not done. So in the middle of the journey where God is working and God is preparing me for what he's prepared for me, I can be happy even if I haven't arrived, and I can rest in what God is doing. Secondly, happiness isn't the purpose of life. It's a byproduct of a life lived on purpose. Happiness is not something we achieve. Happiness is really something we receive when we embrace the purpose of God for our life and we live a life on his purpose and his mission. What you'll find is happiness is simply a byproduct of that. I like what one pastor in my life would often say. He'd talk about fellowship, and Christians are always like, I want fellowship, I want fellowship. And his statement was this: fellowship is like sweat. It's a byproduct of work. If you work, you'll sweat. If you'll get into the work of God, you're going to sweat. In other words, it's just a byproduct. If you get into God's kingdom and God's work, what you're going to find out, fellowship with God's people is a byproduct. So often what we're achieving is happiness. Happiness is the byproduct of getting into the work of God, the plan and the purpose of God. It's just going to happen as a byproduct. Number 3, happiness isn't a better life, but a better me. I can't control my life. I can't control the people in my life. I've tried, and whoa, that is exhausting. And that's probably why many of us are on the verge of burnout. What I can control is me. That is the only thing I can change is me. If you want a better life, draw a circle, stand in the middle of it, and go, this is the only thing I can control, and it will change your life. I can't change my spouse, but I can change me. And if I change me, it might just change my spouse. I can't change necessarily how money thinks about me, but I can change how I think about money. And I have found this out. The more I change the way I think about money, the more money actually seems to like me. So change you, and you'll find that just by changing you, it will change much of your life. And even when I can't be happy about what's happening around me, I can still change what's happening in me. I can't control what life sends my way, but I can control my reaction to it. Well, hopefully that'll give you some just little encouragement, practical insights on helping you set some resolutions and goals that will have sustaining and long-term power. So, Happy New Year and Happy New You.
Thank you for joining us on the All Out Leadership Podcast. We hope you gained new biblical insight that challenged you to grow in your leadership. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, we would love your help in getting the content out farther. You can help by subscribing to the podcast at ericlawson.com/podcast and telling others about it. Next week, Pastor Eric will be back with another episode. So until then, we hope you have a great week being an all-out leader.